Good evening, colleagues, and welcome to the Project Management Guru series. Today, I want to touch on a very thorny uh, contractual issue that sometimes turns out to be very difficult to handle. And I'm talking about a variation order in your construction contract. I want to explain to you or walk you through the process of implementing a variation order in your contract. The process may differ depending on the type of contract you have at hand. But for this series, I will be making reference to the GCC 2015 form of contract. Now, we all know that change is the only constant in this world. There will be a change whether you like it or not in your contract. So you better prepare for it. Once you sign the construction contract, remember, no matter the duration of the contract, there's likely to be some changes. And how do you handle this change when it occurs? Unfortunately, from my experience, these changes most of the time are handled wrongly because people don't understand their contractual obligations as far as these changes are concerned. So today I want to walk you through the processes, what you have to go through to get your change approved and also implemented. So according to the GCC form of contract, I'm referring specifically to the 2015 version, there are listed actions which are considered as work variations. More or less, there are certain changes which has been listed which only qualify as a variation order. And I'll take you through these actions or these changes for you to really understand them. One of the changes that is allowable in the GCC form of contract or is allowed as a variation order is when you have an increase or a decrease in the quantity of any work in the original contract. So anytime you vary the quantity of work in the original contract that you signed, either you increase or decrease it in the quantity. For instance, if the concrete is supposed to be 10 meter cubed and the concrete is increased to 15 meter cubed, then that qualifies for a variation or a works variation. If you omit any work in the contract, provided it's not going to be done by someone else, but it's going to be done by either you are just taking it out of the contract, maybe the budget is not sufficient to do it, that's fine. So you are allowed to omit any work, any portion of the work out of the contract. But make sure you don't omit it and give it to another contractor. Make sure your omissions are genuine. Only genuine omissions are allowed. Okay? And then if the omitted work is done after the completion of the original contract, for instance, you omit a portion of the work, you feel it's not necessary or you don't have sufficient budget to do that portion of the work, and maybe after the completion of the original contract, you give it to another contractor to do it, the original contractor can claim for loss of profit because he was supposed to do it. He budgeted for it, and you decided to omit it and do it later. He can claim for loss of profit. Another change which will call for a variation order is when you change the character and the quality of any work in the original contract. like changing specifications. Let's say you are constructing a channel which is concrete lined and you decide to change it to an earth channel. That's a works variation that qualifies for a variation order. You change the levels, the lines, the position, and the dimensions of any work in the original contract. You decided to extend the length of the fence, the length of the drains. You decided to make the roof higher instead of the original level. All these constitute a variation order. You decided to move the position of the drainage channel to another position. That qualifies as a variation order. When you do additional work, if I say additional work, I'm not talking of just frivolous work. I'm talking of work that is necessary for the completion of the contract. That it has become necessary that we have to do this work for the contract to be completed. Otherwise, the contract will come to a halt. So whatever additional work you do, it must be something necessary for the completion of the contract, of the original contract. Okay. For instance, we realize there's a problem with the design, and there's a problem, and there's the need for us to correct it. This calls for an additional work, and this is necessary because the design is faulty. So sometimes you can do an additional work to correct an existing design, which will make it more suitable for its construction. When you change the specified or approved sequence or method of construction, I'm talking of the method statement in the original contract. If you alter this sequence or method of construction in the original contract, it's also a condition for a variation order. Okay, and if you alter this method of construction just to make the work go faster, that becomes an acceleration of work order, which is also a variation order. So these are the listed changes that is acceptable as a variation order under the GCC 2015 form of contract. So what happens if you want to change that is not listed among this lot? There are things you might encounter on site which is not listed here. For instance, there are things you might do which is similar to what I have just mentioned. It's similar action, similar character, and they change the character of the works, but they are not listed. For instance, let's say you construct a new second channel similar to the original channel. This is not a variation order. It is an extra work. So notice the difference between the variation order and an extra work. We are constructing a new second channel, which is similar to the original channel design. This is not a view. It is an extra work. Or for instance, we want to omit a channel and replace it with a road instead. This is not a view because the road was not in the original works. So this is an extra work. So there are things which are actually extra work. They are not necessarily variations, work variation orders, according to the GCC form of contract. Okay, so know the difference between these listed actions and then those that are unlisted, which we call them extra work. Remember, all these listed actions that I've given you, the value of all these variations has to be included at the end of the contract in the contract price. Okay, thank you. So what happens when there is the need for us to do a change in the contract? What do we have to do? What is the process? First of all, remember, in contract law, you cannot just get up and be changing things in the contract It's very important. Remember, the contract is between an employer and a contractor, and there are also other key stakeholders like the employer's agent and the engineer and others. Whatever change you propose to any portion of the contract must be subjected to an approval process. So first of all, let's assume that these previous actions that I've mentioned to you, somebody makes a request for change. So we call it a request for change proposal. It could come from the contractor. It could come from the employer. These are the contractual parties. This change request might also come from the employer's agent or the engineer. So these parties or these stakeholders are free to request for a change to the contract, change to any portion of the contract. So that is the first step. The second step is for this change to be reviewed. First of all, the change has to go to the employer's agent or the engineer. He has to look at the change request. First of all, he has to review the type of change. What type of change is that? Is it necessary for the completion of the contract? Is it urgent? Or is it something that we can do later on? Is it appropriate? If I say it is urgent, it means it might be on the critical path or on the non-critical path. Is it appropriate? Is it a VO or an extra work? If I say, is it appropriate, it means, is it among the listed actions that I just mentioned? Is it a variation order or an extra work? Is it an increase in work quantities in the bill? Is it an instruction to supplement an existing drawing? The EA, the employer's agent or engineer, has to review this change and satisfy himself with all these, find answers to all these questions when he's doing a review of the change. Then after he has reviewed and he's satisfied that this change is urgent and is necessary for the completion of the contract, and it is appropriate, he's identified it among the listed actions, and it is a variation, qualifies as a variation order, he has to now request for change. He has to formalize the request. So more or less, he has to complete a request for change or a request for works variation form. And then after he has completed the request for change or the variation order request form, he has to evaluate the change. So this change request has come, he needs to evaluate, he needs to look at the details of the change, he needs to look at the feasibility of the change, identify all the impacts that this change may have on the project tax or on the project itself. For instance, there's a health and safety impact. If this change is going to have an effect on the way we manage health and safety, is it going to have an environmental impact, any social impact, any traffic impact? For instance, there was a project where we're building a school and we had to change the entrance of the school. And the entrance is going to be on a roadway. And definitely there will be an impact on traffic. So you have to assess the impact of this change in all these areas. You also have to look at the cost and time impact and the performance of the project at the end of it all. What will be the impact? What will be the impact on the approved work program? Will there be the need for an extension of time? Because sometimes these work variations might occur on a critical path. So you need to actually assess the impact of this change on the critical path, whether it's on the critical path or a non-critical path. You have to assess that. Okay. All right. You also have to evaluate the benefits and the disadvantages of these requested change, the pros and cons. Is this something that we can do without, or the benefits outweigh the cost? You might also propose change options. Look for alternative ways of accomplishing this change, which will give us even greater benefits. Talking of value for money, this change request, there might be alternative ways of implementing this change, which will give us greater benefits. So more or less, you do a bit of value for money analysis there to find out the option that will be most suitable for this change. You have to identify the risk associated with the change. And then you also have to state the source of funding. Where are we going to get money to finance this change? Are we going to finance it through the contingency fund or any cost savings that we've made on the project already, on the contract already, or we are going to require additional funds? All this must be part of the change evaluation. The next thing you do is you have to now give us the change implementation plan. Assuming this change is approved, what is the method? So you have to collect the contractor's method statements and his designs, if he has any, for this change. And also the impacted work program. How will the work program be changed as far as this change is concerned? Then the next thing is we have to take this evaluation to the change approval committee. And remember, there are levels of approval of such changes or such variation orders. It depends on the organization that you are dealing with. They have limits or levels of approval. For instance, if the change is within 20% of the contract sum, then it might be approved at the departmental, regional, or provincial level, depends on what. So you need to be familiar with the client that you are dealing with in their change approval process. If it is beyond 20%, then I believe you have to go to National Treasury for approval. If it's beyond 20% of the contract sum. So let's assume that we are within the limits of approval, and then we get this request for change approved or request for variation order approved. The last step is to implement this change. And we implement this change via an instrument called the variation order. So let's assume that our variation order request or the request for change has been approved by the client. And now we have it. The change has been approved. So what happens is that as the engineer or the employer's agent, you inform the contractor that the variation order has been approved. Immediately, the contractor, you have to update your work program. Because remember, the variation order or the request for change indicates an impact on an approved program. So once this has been approved, you need to really update the approved program, the previously approved program. And then once you update your program, you have to issue an RFI notice, a request for information notice for the variation order or the instructions or drawings that you need. This is where most contractors miss it. And I repeat, after you have informed that the variation order has been approved, first of all, you have to update your work program immediately based on what the approval says. Okay? And then you issue a request for information notice for the view or the view instructions or drawings. The request for information, you tell the EA you want this view at this particular time. It's very important that you issue this RFI notice. The employer's agent is obligated to provide this variation, give you a variation order. So after the approval of the variation order, now the engineer or the employment agent has to issue a formal variation order to you, the contractor. Without this variation order issued to you, please don't execute the variation, the works variation. You will only execute the works variation when the variation order has been issued to you. The employer's agent, you are required to issue this variation order timeously. You are not supposed to delay. You are supposed to issue it immediately to the contractor, give him all the necessary instructions and the drawings needed for the execution of the variation order. Remember, he has given you an RFI notice. The contractor has given you when he needs this information, this variation order. So if you delay him beyond the requested date, it will attract extension of time claims with cost. It's very important that you, as an employer's agent or engineer, you issue the VO immediately, as quickly as possible after the approval. Because remember, he's giving you an RFI notice for this VO. So if you, for instance, he says he needs this VO maybe by the 15th of October. You informed him of the approval of the VO, and then he gave you an RFI that he might need this VO according to the revised program. You need this VO on the 15th of October. You are supposed to issue this VO before the 15th. If you issue it after 15th, it will attract extension of time claims with cost. More or less, you've delayed him the execution of the VO. In case the employer's agent or the engineer issues this VO instructions or issues the VO verbally, the contractor, you need to confirm this verbal VO in 7 days. That is, if the engineer or the employer's agent gives you the variation order verbally instead of written, it's supposed to be written, but assuming that he gives you these instructions verbally, you need to confirm it in 7 days after the issue of the verbal VO. And the employer's agent or the engineer, you are supposed to confirm or contradict these verbal instructions within 7 days. If the employer's agent does not contradict the verbal VO, then beyond the 7 days, the verbal instruction is deemed to be the VO. That is, after the contractor gets back to him to confirm the verbal instructions, he must do that within 7 days. And if he doesn't, then we assume that the verbal instruction is the VO. If the contractor fails to confirm the verbal VO within 7 days, he is time barred and he cannot claim extension of time later. Then the next thing is, after the VO have been issued to the contractor and assuming it has been confirmed, if it is verbal, the next thing is the employer's agent or engineer has to value the variation order. What is the amount involved? How much is it going to cost? Plus reimbursables to the contractor. So you need to work out a valuation of the variation. You have to issue this valuation and a certified payment within 28 days after the issue of the VO for the contractor's acceptance. So you don't just issue the variation order to the contractor and go to bed. You need to value the variation order and then certify the payment within 28 days for the contractor to accept. Anything beyond the 28 days will attract an extension of time claim with cost from the contractor. Assuming you issue the valuation of the VO and the certified payment, and the contractor is not satisfied, or is not happy with your valuation and the certified payment for this works variation, the contractor, you can issue a dissatisfaction claim, clause 10.2 of the GCC, and go ahead and comply. You cannot refuse the execution of the variation order. If you're not happy with it, just issue a dissatisfaction claim that you are not happy with the valuation, but you have to comply with the variation order. The last thing is you implement the variation, the works variation, whatever change that has been requested. Thank you very much for listening. This is how changes in the contract are handled. And I believe you've learned something, and next time you will handle the changes, contractual changes, properly. My name is the Project Management Guru. You can join my Facebook group, GCCJBCC hashtag, or you can also visit me on YouTube, JB Nate, my YouTube channel, and subscribe to some of my YouTube videos. Or you can also attend some of my weekend lessons on contract management or project management. Thank you very much and have a good night.